across the state, across the nation, around the world, wherever Mississippians are gathered as one. We thank you so very, very much on the number one place to be. And again, from the Trustmark Studios, looking for long-term ways to save on your mortgage? Check with the team at Trustmark. People you trust, advice that works. Member FDIC. Will in the hot chair this morning, and joining us on C Spire text line. On C Spire TV at Channel 70 and also SuperTalk TV, as well as broadcast stations across the state, is the one and only political analyst and chief communication officer, director of Office of Public Affairs at MSU. It is Sid Salter. Good morning, sir. Looking good. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. Glad to be with you.
Well, Will, can you, if you can join us, certainly you can join in on this conversation on both video and audio, because I like everybody's input on this one. And you're just a quick recap, Sid, of what you thought when you woke up this morning and saw the results.
Well, obviously the so-called red wave didn't reach shore for the Republicans, but it appears very likely at this point that the GOP will have about a 13-seat majority in the House, take control of the House, which has been important to Mississippians, given that we have 3 Republican members. It'll cost the state a chairmanship at Homeland Security, but you'll have three of our congressmen who have advanced their position. We didn't have a Senate race in the state. Mm-hmm. It appears at this point, although nothing is certain given Georgia, that we're going to end up right where we were before the election, 50-50, with the vice president breaking the tie in the Senate. Now, obviously, if Warnock does not get over the 50% threshold in Georgia, there could be a race for all the cookies in Georgia in December. Yeah. But at this point, where the votes are still out in Georgia, that appears increasingly less likely by the hour. So that's kind of the situation as to control of Capitol Hill. Broader takeaways from the evening, Paul, I think you can't ignore the fact that Governor Kemp in Georgia outperformed Herschel Walker by about 5%. And so what does that say about Donald Trump's ascendancy in the Republican Party? What does that say about Ron DeSantis' strategy in Florida? I would argue that the big winner last night on the Republican side was indeed Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has shown that you can withstand sort of a full frontal assault from Donald Trump and prosper at the polls. That happened in other parts of the country as well. Mm-hmm. The second takeaway that I would see is something I think you touched on earlier, and Will touched on about 7. Candidate quality matters, and it matters. And I think what you saw, rather than this wave coming, I think people made fairly intuitive decisions about the candidates and whether or not they were the best suited to do the job. John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, all sorts of reasons for the voters to reject Fetterman, but at the end of the day, it appears that Pennsylvania voters were concerned about the carpetbagger aspect of the Oz candidacy. So it was an odd election based on the polling, but we've seen for about 3 election cycles now that the polling can be dubious.
I think you can just about throw polling and political consultants out, from the Karl Rove to the Frank Luntz and all of these other people. I mean, there were a couple of things, Sid, that made it a little bit uneasy for me in the last couple of days, and certainly yesterday, prior to day before the election, prior to yesterday. And I watch mostly Fox News, but I went around to OAN and to Newsmax, and even spent some time on some of the other channels. But, I mean, it was almost like a foregone conclusion that they'd already counted the votes, and this is going to be the greatest tsunami ever. And I don't know if that played a little bit in part where people said, yeah, you know what, weather's not that great, I'm not feeling that good, I'm just not going to go vote because the Republicans are going to win that. It may have been a little bit of a lot of different things. I also think in some of these states, certainly in the blue states, that the abortion issue, certainly in states that had situations where there was no abortion for, incest or rape or the mother's health, it was just an amalgamation of things. Your thoughts?
I think that's one thing that the networks and a lot of the sort of establishment prognosticators missed. The Dobbs decision, whatever side you fall on with that, the Dobbs decision was very impactful in this race. And Paul, I do think that there was a certain complacency maybe in the last 48 to 72 hours among Republicans. If you looked at the footage last night of people standing in line to vote right at the time the polls were supposed to close, you could look at the folks standing in line and have a pretty good idea, who they were and for whom they would be voting. A lot of young people standing in those lines, and so I think there was a great urgency among Democratic voters because of Dobbs, because they had feared an erosion of what they saw as reproductive rights, and they were rallied on that single issue. I do think Republicans got complacent when there was such a pervasive, from the left, from the right, from the middle, a pervasive prediction of a big red wave, Republican takeover of both houses. So I do think some people stayed home.
Another reason some young people came out were in 5 states they had the marijuana legislation, and I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit shocked because I thought Arkansas would do this. Arkansas had recreational marijuana on the ballot yesterday, and I didn't. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders also won her governorship, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But voters in 5 states were deciding on Election Day whether to approve recreational marijuana, and I know that Arkansas, I think it was Missouri, the other. Arkansas and Missouri said no. The others said yes. So if you were thinking and planning about having recreational marijuana in Arkansas, forget about it. They turned it down in Arkansas, and they turned it down in Missouri. Your thoughts?
I have a hard time letting go of an image. I went to a niece's wedding in Alaska last year, and driving through this pristine Alaskan wilderness on the Kenai Peninsula, vast acreage of just beautiful scenery, broken every 30 miles by a pot store. And so I think the country's attitudes, even in places that are conservative like Alaska, I think people are in many ways throwing up their hands and sort of forgetting about what we've accepted as conventional wisdom about marijuana. And I think that you're going to see this every election cycle ad nauseum moving forward.
And in the same respect, I think it was part of the reason that you saw some movements at least a little bit redder in states like Oregon and states like California in some areas, and also in some places in the Northeast, where you got Oregon and Seattle, Washington, and also in places in California and San Francisco, where the homeless is just absolutely incredible. That said, that most of those people have a drug problem, and most of those people are in states that started off with marijuana and continue to not only decriminalize that, but ask for more, as Fetterman is doing in Pennsylvania. But let's go over the District 1, 2, 3, and 4 in our state, get some thoughts from Sid Salter about those and more, and also the governors. There were some shockers there. Carrie Lake, to me, was one of the biggest shockers. I thought she would walk away with that one, but it's still up for grabs, is my understanding. That and more with Sid coming up next. Republicans have to find a way to make inroads in the metro areas. Fetterman won only 13 of 67 Pennsylvania counties. Similar losses in other states like Michigan. Well, that's always been a problem. But you know what, guys? I'll say this, that some of the analysis on the aftermath is because, number one, Mitch McConnell did not pour money into a lot of the races. Well, I guess the leadership of the GOP felt like it was a foregone conclusion or something. They gave up on some of the races. Number two, the ground game of the Democrats is still strong, tremendously strong, and they get out to vote. And a lot of the other things played into it. Let me do these, and Will has also a point that I want to broach. But for incumbent District 1, for the incumbent, Trent Kelly won with over 70% of the vote. District 2, which I thought it was a little bit surprising, that Challenger Flowers, the Caucasian American, going against Benny Thompson in that district. He worked the heck out of it. We had him on the air the other day. But Thompson won by 59%. But again, Flowers had 41% of the vote in District 2. So I thought that was a pretty good showing for someone going against Benny Thompson. District 3, Congressman Michael Guest, the winner with over 70%. And, of course, the new congressman, who you call him sheriff, but you can also call him Congressman-elect, Mike Ezell, Jackson County Sheriff, won the race over the Democrat Johnny Dupree, and an independent whom we had on the air with about 75% of the vote. Sid, any shockers in there or anything else?
No, the Mississippi House races went very much according to predictions. I was a little surprised at the margin of victory in Congressman Thompson's district. But again, I think you become a victim of the information out there when people are told for months that somebody is a lead pipe cinch to be reelected, they lose interest in participating. And there wasn't a whole lot else on the ballot to get voters to turn out. So, but yeah, for a chairman and for somebody who's in Congressman for Life mode, like Congressman Thompson, that was a sort of an underperformance.
We did have a cyber attack, is my understanding, last night. Some Mississippi State websites were briefly knocked offline last night after so-called distributed denial of service, DDoS, attacks against them as the voters turned out at polling places across the state. U.S. Department of Homeland Security officials stressed that such attacks, which flood websites with computer messages, would not affect the actual vote total. Two officials with the DHS cyber attack and security said there were no specific or credible threats disrupting the election infrastructure, but I think in the many years when Delbert was here, and every time he came on the air after an election, he always alluded to how many times we were trying to be attacked at the Secretary of State's office, and I think Michael Watson would say the same thing. In this relationship now, because of the dynamics, and I was telling Will off the air, I said, would you like to be in the war rooms now of the GOP and also in Mar-a-Lago and DeSantis camps? Because the dynamics are going to be strained, to say the least, from now all the way through till qualification day. And what will he say coming up next Tuesday? Will?
Oh, I think that Sid, I think the line in the sand has been drawn. What are your thoughts on the battle that we're probably going to see between DeSantis and Trump?
Well, I think when the governor's sanctimonious comment was made, I think the gloves not only came off but were thrown into the bed of the pickup truck. So I think DeSantis showed the Republican Party nationally the template from moving forward. Trump, Will, you made an excellent point earlier this morning. Trump is still strong in primaries, but in general elections, I think DeSantis showed a template for how the party can move forward past that. Doesn't mean that Trump's going to lose the influence that he has in primary politics anytime soon. But there's a lot of time between now and 24. There's going to have to be some answers coming out of the Attorney General's office in New York, the U.S. Attorney General's office. Former President Trump has got a hard road to traverse, given some of these legal challenges. DeSantis, on the other hand, the only thing that he's got holding him back is, and I wrote about this earlier, he's on hurricane duty, and he's got to do a good job of that, a la Haley Barbour in Mississippi. If he doesn't, then his national aspirations fade because his home voters are dissatisfied with him. But if he does a good job on hurricane duty, he's going to be really primed to do well. I couldn't help but note last night that one of the first tweets that came out congratulating DeSantis came from Jeb Bush. So, there is nobody from that Chamber of Commerce, moderate sort of Republican camp more visible than Jeb Bush, and he solidly got behind DeSantis. So, all of that's very interesting inside baseball.
Sid, wouldn't you also say that I think people, when listening to us this morning, would say, I love Trump. You see that at the rallies and everything else. But we understand, is it a possibility there that what will come out of this is Trump fatigue will probably be highlighted a little bit more than normal now because of this?
Oh, I don't think there's
like
any
the
question.
guy. You love the guy.
I don't think there's any question.
You've seen what he's done. He's done an incredible job. But it's almost like the X-Lax candidate. Like, if you want chocolate, you don't go buy some X-Lax because of all the stuff that comes with the chocolate. By the way,
a little early for that analogy, but okay.
I'm writing that one down, Paul. That's a good one right there.
Well, it was off the top of my head. You guys might want to rethink that before you repeat it. Go ahead. Anybody now? Did I stun both of you?
Let me ask you this, Sid. No. Do you think this is the end or just the beginning of the celebrity candidate? Because both sides featured celebrity candidates. Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania was pretty prominent. And then you had, on the left side, you had Stacey Abrams, and then, of course, Beto O'Rourke, who are, they started in the political arena, but they've kind of become celebrities. Do you think this is the end or just the beginning of the celebrity candidate?
I hope. I hope that it's the beginning of the end. But if you looked around the country last night, you saw a whole lot of candidates whose preparation for public service was looking good in the media. Paul's more enamored with the Republican nominee in Arizona for governor than I was, and frankly, I am, like Paul, surprised she didn't do better. But I think if you start digging into it, how much there is there in terms of policy. So Mehmet Oz had a good talk show. How much does he know about Medicaid in Pennsylvania? So there are all sorts of rabbit holes you can go down on. I think the electorate last night said that the reason that Kemp outperformed Herschel Walker, that Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania outperformed Fetterman, I think people were on both sides, Democrats and Republicans. I think they were looking at candidates going, do I really want to hand the keys to the car to this guy or this lady? Are they qualified? Can they do the job? And I think that is a hopeful sign. People who've been predicting the demise of democracy for the last 6 months, I think voters showed up and kind of showed out in judging candidate quality, and that I found that to be very encouraging.
All except in Pennsylvania.
The thing there. I think that was a coattail deal. I think without Shapiro, I don't think Fetterman makes it. And frankly, I don't think Herschel Walker would have done as well in Georgia as he's doing without Kemp. So there were coattails visible last night.
Stand by for that. We'll talk more about this one, but you're looking at, and just in my own mind, the new AOC, and the new AOC will pop on the stage probably by at least first quarter of next year, if at least by late spring or summer. The new AOC will be Fetterman's wife, and if you haven't been following that one, get used to it. The governor's races in California, New York, Texas, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arkansas, Maryland, Georgia, Florida, and one more. We'll go over those. Back to our analysis of yesterday's bombastic election. And I told Will this a little earlier this morning. I said it was like, if you're using an analogy, it was a strong straight line wind where it did some damage in some areas, but it was far, far from a hurricane red wave. And I think people are kind of looking at that this morning. Sid Salter, Will, we're talking politics. Let me run over these quickly and just ask you guys any surprises to you. But California, Governor Gavin Newsom, with all of the homelessness and everything else and people leaving the state, was easily reelected. New York, she was appointed. Now she's elected. The Democrat governor, Kathy Hochul, beat Lee Zeldin. Lee put up a good fight. Not sure if people expected him to win or not. In Texas, Governor Abbott beat the heck out of Beto, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, and hopefully that's the last we've seen of him. Pennsylvania, Democrat Josh Shapiro won, beating Republican election denier Donnie Mastriani. Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer was reelected. She beat Tudor Dixon. In Maryland, Democrat Wes Moore defeated Republican Larry Hogan. In Georgia, Brian Kemp, as you've heard, won a second term by beating Stacey Abrams, and hopefully we've seen the last of her except on CNN and MSNBC. In Florida, Governor DeSantis. In Arkansas, it was Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Any surprises, Will, or Sid, in that at all?
Not really. I think when you get past, I do think your candidate in Arizona, I think she underperformed sort of the amount of media attention she got, but a lot of that was driven by the rhetoric in the race. Again, Kemp and Shapiro, to me, are the two pivotal gubernatorial races because, it was a case of them outperforming the Senate candidates and perhaps, and we won't know this until there's more almost precinct by precinct analysis done, but Shapiro, I believe, had a great deal to do with Fetterman winning that race. And there's no question that Kemp had a lot to do with Herschel Walker performing as well as he did because, let's face it, Herschel was facing a buzzsaw, some of his own creation maybe, in Georgia. But those two gubernatorial races had a tremendous amount to do with the Senate races. I also think that you saw the same dynamics. Candidate quality mattered to voters, and I think they made comparisons. And so you did see nationally split tickets, which is a rarity. Split tickets are a rarity in American politics. And so it was common, Paul, when we were young and had full heads of hair, but no longer.
Well, I don't even remember those days anymore, so it's been a long time ago. Will, I'm looking at the 4 states now where the four Senate seats, and is it Alaska?
Alaska has that ranked choice. Is that correct, Sid? That ranked choice. So you'll see 2 Republicans. 2
Republicans.
Murkowski, and I can't even pronounce the other lady's name. She was a Trump-endorsed candidate. She's currently leading in Alaska. And then you've got Nevada, which is still kind of up in the air. Arizona, which is still up in the air, although Captain Kelly is leading there over Masters. And then the other one is Wisconsin. That's another one that Republicans are leading in. Ron Johnson is leading in that one currently. Last I saw, it was about 90-something% in. He's over 50%. It looks like he's going to win that one. So it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, if Nevada is the key now, if Republicans can flip Nevada, they can get to 51 because they're at 48 right now. You'll take Wisconsin. You'll take, more than likely, you'll take Nevada, depending on that whole Las Vegas area. If I think most of those are counted now, but it looks like Nevada's going to go Republican, and that'll be one that you'll flip. But you're going to lose Arizona.
Nevada goes Republican. Arizona State, Kelly is reelected. Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin. That's obviously key, but it looks like Johnson, and you get back to, can Warnock get to 50% or not? Can you imagine what things will be like in Georgia if there is a December runoff between those two? That will be ground zero for the if it were wrestling, it would be the heavyweight championship.
There are 64 House seats left in play, 172 Democrats right now. Republicans have 199. If it should happen, will there be a push? Because I think Trump has said something about he's going to work to get McConnell out. That's just another fight that's not needed right now. And I don't know if there's any, because we had Roger Wicker on, and I think most of the people are settled with McConnell from here on out till he decides to retire. But your thoughts on that one, Sid?
I don't see that being a path that the Republicans and the Senate will take. And again, last night's results weakened former President Trump in that regard. So I don't see that happening.
Because we're almost out of time here, but I do want to ask you this one with the big announcement of the steel plant over your way in the Golden Triangle area in Columbus. Did that solidify or maybe negate some people running against the Republican primary against State? Or where do you think that stands now? And those questions will be coming up pretty soon, too, as we get to a deadline.
Well, I think the general growth in Mississippi's economy, the steel plant is large and sexy, and anytime you're talking about 1,000 jobs with a $93,000 salary, that gets a lot of attention. But in smaller chunks, in a cumulative way, the economy coming out of COVID has been very impressive. I also think from a retail political standpoint, Governor Reeves has done the things he needs to do to solidify the Republican base. I still see Brandon Presley as the most viable option the Democrats have, but how are you going to get the National Democratic Party to pour the kind of resources into that race that they would need to be competitive? So I don't think it's just the steel plant. I think it's the general rise in the state's economy that would make the difference there.
I was listening to Fox a little bit earlier this morning before we came on, and they alluded to that too. The amount of an ungodly amount of millions upon millions of dollars poured into some of these races by the Democrats far outweigh those of the Republicans. So whether we like it or not, advertising and political campaigning as far as over the airwaves still has an impact, does it not?
Well, $9.7 billion spent in this cycle. And so, and that's up from about $6 billion and change 2 years ago. So it's off the chain.
There's an old newspaper guy. Let me ask you this, and I think, Will, did you hear the story yesterday? We had this, that 4 of the major newspapers in Birmingham have decided to
in Alabama,
in Alabama, I'm sorry, in Alabama have decided to stop pressing papers and go full digital. There's some changing times out there, isn't it, Sid?
Yeah, and not for the better. The depth that you miss from those 36-inch newspaper stories that younger people don't take time to read now, but they provided a lot of context and a lot of food for thought that's just simply missing. And we're making policy in this country by tweet, and that's to an old guy, that's a little frightening.
Well, being a radio guy for all of my adult life, I have said this more than one. We need newspapers in the hometown areas for investigations. Radio doesn't do that. Television doesn't do that. And when there's corruption out there, and you have a fair and unbiased newspaper who goes after the truth, no matter which side it's on, is valuable to that community, and that is going to be missed. Your final thoughts, Mr. Salter?
It was a surprising election given the hype on both sides, but I am encouraged. Like I said, we've been pounded with a narrative that democracy is on the razor's edge and about to, fall. I think democracy reasserted itself last night. The voters reminded us that they indeed are still in charge, and I think that's a good thing.
I've said earlier, and we'll continue this with Will in a moment or two and talk about that, and also JT will be on, why I think it possibly could be not as bad as some of the Republicans are thinking, because when you start looking at it, the next election, and even bigger elections coming up in just 2 years, does this make us, as conservatives, in as good a position? In other words, if we had won by, and if the conservatives had won by an overwhelming landslide, how would that play into the next 2 years? We'll talk about that when we come back. Sid, thank you, sir. Always a pleasure. Take care. Look forward to talking to you a little bit later on.
Take care.